in any story, having solid emotions and really authentic scenes with your characters showing their feelings is a really great way to improve the quality of your manga, comic, or light novel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you 16 crucial tips on how to write emotional scenes, whether it be in your mangas, comics, light novels, or just for fun. Hi everyone, if you don't already know me, my name is Cross, and on this channel I dedicate all my videos to helping you turn your manga into a masterpiece. If you're new to my channel, please consider hitting that little subscribe button and clicking the bell notification to get notified every time I upload something new. I upload new videos every Sunday and Thursday all about manga creating, and I'd love to have you join me on the channel. Also, I have some very exciting news. I am now on Ko-fi. So if you want to support this channel and make sure that your contributions go towards this channel, please consider buying me a coffee. Your donations will go towards improving the quality of these videos and also meaning that I can produce more of these videos. So now let's get straight into the video on 16 tips on how to write emotional scenes for your mangas, comics, or light novels. The first step to creating really solid emotional scenes is to first create characters that your readers care about. This means that if something bad happens to your characters, or if your characters are put into a dangerous situation, your readers are going to feel more inclined to feel emotional about those characters, and that in turn will make it into a more emotional scene. Now, there are a few ways you can create characters that your readers will care about. First of all, you need to ensure your characters have a strong goal and a strong reason why they must fulfill it. When your characters have a strong goal, your readers will want to see these characters from beginning to end and watch these characters as they try to fulfill their goals. You also want to make sure that your character is the underdog, so this means that they aren't always winning at everything. You should ensure that your character actually fails more and makes mistakes more than they actually succeed, because your readers will be more likely to want to root for your character if they are more of an underdog. You also want to ensure that you create a character that your readers can relate to. So this means giving your characters emotions that your readers may be able to feel a connection with. So if your character is going through a bad situation, say struggling at school, and they feel a bit emotional about these events, your readers may be able to relate to it because they have experienced something similar themselves. And finally, give your character likable qualities, because your readers will be more likely to care about your characters if they are a likable character. If your character is needlessly cruel and nasty to the characters around them, then it's going to be pretty difficult for your readers to really like your character. Think about what your character could have that really makes them likable to the characters around them. In turn, that should also help you to make that character likable to your readers as well. Now, my next tip for writing emotional scenes is to make believable characters. Having characters be believable during emotional scenes helps you to avoid overly dramatic scenes or scenes that seem very unrealistic. Now, in order to make believable characters, you have to convince your readers that these characters are real. Always try to put yourself in the character's position and think about, what would you do if you were this character in this situation? Maybe they wouldn't immediately burst out crying if a difficult situation happens, but maybe they'd go a bit silent, maybe they'd even get angry, or maybe they'd simply think about something else or try and distract themselves from the situation. It's really important to consider their personality in the emotional moment. So a character who is more emotional would likely react in a more emotional way when the time calls for it. They may burst out crying because that is natural to their personality. But if you have another character who seems more stubborn or angry, it might be pretty unlikely if they burst out crying during an emotional moment. They would likely be more reserved and hide their emotions until a time they can deal with it on their own. It might help if you write a list of the characters in your story and write about how they would react in these particular situations during your story. You can use this as a practice in order to create better character emotions in your book. So consider, how would your characters react during a breakup, failing a test, losing someone they care about, being stuck in a difficult situation, feeling afraid or scared, or being rejected. My third tip is create strong character connections. In order to make your emotional scenes more realistic, it's very important that you give your characters strong connections to the other characters around them. And they don't have to be human characters either, they can even be animal characters, and that can also create a very emotional moment. So if you want to develop an emotional moment between characters, you first need to develop the connection, because then your readers will really see these characters developing together, and it will become more emotional when you eventually have a situation where those characters might be torn apart or difficult situations occur that separate them. Whether it be a family connection or a sibling connection or even a romance, all of these have potentials to lead up to emotional scenes in your book, and they can all be ways to develop your story a lot more and show you how your characters react in difficult circumstances. For an example of this, your character might have a sibling that they are very, very close to, and they've always done everything together, and when they're separated, your character realizes how much they relied on their siblings to help them during their life. My next tip is create emotional moments that your readers can relate to. When creating an emotional moment in your story, try and think of it as a moment that your readers may be able to relate to as well. We've all experienced emotional moments, loss, failure, breakups, or anything like that. So you really need to also think about what you or your audience may have experienced at some point in their lives and how you can integrate those emotional experiences into your story. No matter what genre of story you have, these emotional moments can still be the same regardless of the type of genre. Everyone will have experienced these kinds of emotional moments at some point in their lives. So in every emotional moment you write, think about how your audience could be relating to this moment and how to write the scene in such a way where your audience may be able to feel the connection with their own lives. It's also very important to not explain everything. Show more rather than tell. One very important thing to keep in mind when writing emotional moments in your story is that much of the emotions are actually shown more in what the character is doing rather than what is said. So understanding, showing, and not telling is very important when you want to write emotional moments in your book. When creating an emotional moment, you might think of a character crying. However, you have to be aware that tears don't always equal a sad moment, and sadness can be expressed in many different ways. For example, a character could have just been rejected, and instead of that character crying or having a monologue, maybe they simply look down at their feet and they become quiet and reserved, which might be very different from how they usually react to situations. And that shows the feeling rather than directly tells the reader how they are feeling. An important character in your story could have just died, and your main character, who was very close to them, might, instead of talking about the situation, maybe they immediately lash out at the people around them or blame others or blame themselves because that's how their personality would make them react to this difficult situation. You have to think about these emotional situations as being more true to life. When something bad happens to you and you experience these emotional situations, how do you immediately react? You probably wouldn't go and tell someone, oh, I feel sad, or you probably wouldn't cry and immediately burst out with emotion. In many cases, you may end up becoming more quiet or resigned. You may feel a little bit hesitant to talk to other people about your emotions, or you may be someone that prefers to write about the way you're feeling rather than express it in words to the people around you. So really consider when you are creating these emotional scenes, how you would also react and how you, when you are going through emotions, may show your emotions rather than directly tell your emotions. And you can apply that knowledge to your own books and have your characters showing their emotions rather than directly saying it. It's also very important to put a focus on internal conflict. The internal conflict in the story is what your character is going through in their minds. So there's external conflict, which is battles and arguments and things like that, but the internal conflict is something very important to think about when you are creating emotional scenes, and it's something that I feel like gets overlooked quite often. So the internal conflict is the way your character perceives the world and perceives themselves. So you need to consider with your scenes as well, what is your character's internal conflict? Maybe if they lose someone they care about, maybe their internal conflict is that they blame themselves for what happened, and so throughout the story they keep thinking about that and they keep thinking about how they feel like that they were the cause behind that event. The internal conflicts can also come as fears or internal problems, so your character might be constantly afraid of making a mistake, and so that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and your character tends to make more mistakes because they're so worried about making mistakes. So think about what your character's internal conflict is and how that might affect them not only in emotional moments but in any scene in your story. The next tip is more about the art in your story. So this is more focused on manga or comics rather than novels, and that is spend a lot of time focusing on your character's emotions. So when it comes to the art, if you want to really reveal a character's emotion, rather than showing it in a very small panel on a page, dedicate an entire single panel for your character's emotion. So show the event and then show your character's reaction, and having it in a single panel with that main focus in your character's emotion is a great way to really hone into what your character is feeling and reveal it to your characters. Another way I like to do it is I like to show the event and then show the character's emotion, but then over the course of the panels I like to show the characters subtle shifts in reaction, subtle ways of how their face might change depending on the events that are happening. Another important thing to keep in mind when writing emotional scenes is that it's important to trick your readers into thinking that something positive is going to happen next. And it feels very mean to trick your readers like this, but it's a very good way to write emotional moments and to shock them into feeling an emotion. The best way to do this is to start with something negative. So there's a little bit of a downfall there, and your readers go, oh, I'm a bit worried what's going to happen next. And then you start building it up, and your readers might go, oh, okay, everything's going to work out just fine. You trick your readers into thinking that this is all going to work out well and everything is going to be positive. And that is when you have the crash and you reveal to your readers that it is not going to turn out positively, and unfortunately things are not going to go well for your characters or for the situation or for the event. Now, as I said, it is very mean to trick your readers like this, but sometimes it is necessary if you want to create a truly emotional scene in your book. My next tip is try and show your character's emotions in more creative ways, rather than just having your character crying. Now, I did touch on this in the previous tips, but I want to mention it again because it's very important to keep in mind. I'd like you to write a list of ways you could have your characters show their emotions without necessarily crying. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to avoid your characters crying altogether. Your characters can, of course, cry in emotional scenes, but it's also very good to consider other ways your character might show their negative emotions. For example, if your character is more of an angry or stubborn character, they might smash the things around them, or another character might end up becoming very quiet and resigned, or a different character might push themselves into their writing or art. Another character might completely distract themselves with work, and that is the way that they show when they are going through an emotional time. Consider how each of your characters in your book would react during an emotional situation without necessarily crying, and this is a good way to have a solid list of ways your characters can show their emotions that you can refer to as you're writing your book, and in this way you have a lot more creative ways to reveal this. My next tip is think of a time when you have gone through a similar moment. If you're struggling to write an emotional scene and you don't really know how to write it next, and you're feeling a bit stuck about writing your character's emotions, one really great way to resolve this is to think about a moment when you felt the same way. For example, if you experienced a type of loss yourself in the past, that can really help you in writing about your character's feelings. Think about how you felt and what you did, and put your own emotions into this scene with your character, and that's a really good way to make the emotions of your character a lot more realistic because you have experienced something similar. Even if you have not experienced something similar to your character, you could still try and think about an emotional moment that you have experienced and try and put those emotions into your character, because the key here is really just to feel those emotions yourself. And when you feel them yourself, it's a lot easier to think about how your character would experience that moment also. Next, consider your character's breaking point. Ask yourself the question, what makes your character snap? Understanding where your character snaps can really reveal their breaking point in your story and how they might be triggered to have an emotional moment in your book. Even the most cheerful or positive characters should have some kind of breaking point, and when this breaking point is crossed, it's likely that your character would go through a lot more emotions. For example, as a child, your character might have always been told to be very strong and to never show their emotions on the surface, and so they always force themselves to do that. And so when they go through a very emotional moment, maybe when they lose someone they care about, this is their breaking point and they finally snap and reveal their true emotions. In another example, your character might always seem to act happy and cheerful on the surface, but they hide all of their true emotions within. And when something bad happens, eventually they snap and they reveal their true emotions on the surface. So really consider what is the cause to make your character snap, and how does that snap really affect their emotions on the surface. As well as this, also consider when writing emotional scenes that your character should at some point be forced to decide between two equally bad things. Giving your character two equally bad choices is a good way to create more dire situations in your book. There can be plenty of decisions made in your story, and most of them will be between something bad or something good. But in order to really amplify the stakes of your story and to make your story more powerful, forcing your character to make a decision between two very bad things is a really good way to really amplify the tension and to force your audience to keep reading more to see what will happen next. So let's say your character is in a zombie-filled world and their friend has just been infected, but there's also zombies breaking down the door, and your character has a gun with only one bullet left. So what do they do in this situation? They have to decide between many equally bad choices, but they have to make a choice, and that's the key with this tip. You need to make sure that your character has to make a decision, but the decision is between many or even just two horrible decisions. And this forces your character to take action, and it also puts your readers on the edge of their seats and leaves them feeling very emotional when things inevitably go wrong in this situation. Allow emotional scenes to help characters grow. Emotional scenes are fantastic in the way that they force your characters to change and develop in your story. Once your character goes through an emotional circumstance, they should be able to change as characters. Maybe before they were a little bit childish around certain situations, but after going through an emotional moment, they realize something about themselves, and this forces them to change into a better and more developed character. A character might end up losing a loved one, which is a very, very hard thing to go through, but they end up realizing that they relied on that person so much, and this situation forces them to grow more on their own and understand how they can protect and defend themselves. Another great way to write emotional scenes is to focus on what your character loses when they fail. This is all about setting the stakes high, so you really need to make sure that in dire situations, there always needs to be a very big loss if your character fails, and so when your character does inevitably lose in that situation, your readers feel a lot more emotional seeing your character going through this bad situation. So for example, your character may be crossing the world in your story, trying to find the magical potion that is going to cure the person that is close to them. However, your character may not be able to get to that place in time, and so the loss in this situation is the loss of the person they care the most about. So revealing that loss and showing how your character feels about that loss is one very good way to create a very powerful emotional moment. Another example is that your character may be applying for a job that they really want, but they may end up being rejected for that job. And so the loss is that they won't get to follow the dream that they have always wanted to follow, and that is a very emotional moment for your character. So it's all about setting the stakes high and giving your character something very important to strive towards, but also considering what is lost if they do not manage to get to that point and they fail. What is lost when they fail? And when you show that, your readers will feel a much bigger emotional connection to your characters. Writing an emotional scene also uses all of the senses in an emotional scene. Most people only focus on the sight and hearing when writing a scene, but you also need to consider the touch, the taste, and the smell when you are writing an emotional scene and how that may apply. Your character might smell something that reminds them of a loved one, or they might touch a painting that someone very close to them painted and they really feel the texture of the painting and that reminds them of the person they care about. Or they may taste some food that reminds them of something they ate when they were younger, and it really puts their mind back to a much more happier and peaceful time, which in turn creates a more emotional moment. My final tip in this video is use emotions to help convey positive moments a lot more effectively. Sad moments in a story should never be avoided because the sad moments help us to appreciate the happier moments a lot more. When your character goes through an emotional moment, you should always have a rise as well and have your characters go through more positive moments. You can actually use the emotional moments to help emphasize the more positive moments. For example, after the death of a character in your story, this may cause the main character to get closer to a friend of theirs. Or if your character fails a test, they may end up finding something else that they truly love and they truly feel passionate about. The character might go through a heartbreak or rejection, but they end up finding someone who is a lot better suited for them than that other person was. Always keep in mind that the emotional moments in your story should always lead to more positive moments. You should never solely focus on the emotional moments. Always use the emotional scenes to emphasize the more positive moments and help lead your characters down this more positive path. Remember that within sad moments, there can always be something positive found in them. Even if it is very hard for your characters at that moment, you can always find a way for it to lead to something more positive in the future of your character's path. And creating these moments can help your audience feel more of a connection to your book, and it can also create more realistic character growth and development throughout your story. So thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know about what emotional moments you're creating in your story because I'd really love to hear about them. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!